All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining us live, welcome. I'm joined by Julien and Kiersten Sauders from Rich and Regular. If you are watching us on the replay, thank you so much for checking in as well. How this is going to work, we're going to have a conversation about family and finances. So a lot of different directions is going to go from being a dependent, so us high school people being dependent on our families, and we're going to go through a lifetime basically to the end where maybe you might have parents being dependent on you or kids of your own who might be dependent on you. So we're going to talk about a lot of these different things. That should be about 30 to 40 minutes. And then we're going to have a Q&A section at the end where we will answer your questions. So if you're sitting in a classroom live with us, make sure your teacher is typing the question into the chat and sending it on to us. If you can include your name, that'd be great. We'd love to give you a shout out. If you're watching the replay, go into the description below. You'll see any links that we talk about. And then you can also leave comments and we will try and get in there and answer your comments for you whenever we can. But I'm excited to get started. You guys ready?
Yeah, absolutely. We are.
All right. So Rich and Regular is this blog that you two created, back in 2017? Is that when Rich and Regular was born?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why'd you do it?
Why did we do it?
Why'd you do it?
We felt like there was a space missing on the internet. This was back in the day when personal finance blogs and even finding financial information online was kind of still new. But a lot of the conversations that were being had were focused on the very how-to, so basic financial literacy, or the extreme end of financial literacy. And we felt like there needed to be something for the middle, something for people who wanted to be regular people, not particularly exceptional or particularly famous in any part of their lives, but still be really well off and financially comfortable. And so we started by telling our story.
I think that was really true, wasn't it? That personal finance was reserved for the rich white guy and everyone else. There wasn't really much out there for anyone else. And I love that that's what you guys have really brought to the table. You also are authors of an amazing book called Cashing Out, which I really enjoyed. I like the perspective that it brought. I like the personal finance lessons. I feel like I learned new stuff, even though I feel like I know a decent amount about personal finance. So, huge shout out for that one. That's called Cashing Out, Win the Wealth Game by Walking Away. What inspired that one?
I think it was a very similar experience as when we launched the blog, right? I mean, a lot of these things, I think for entrepreneurs really start from a point of frustration, which is that we come across information, we're super excited about it, we want to share with people, and then people don't respond the same way. And then we realized as former marketing and sales professionals, well, this is actually a really interesting creative challenge. How do we make this message applicable? And so we started breaking that down. It was like, all right, well, let's center the stories in an experience that this new set of readers might be able to identify with. And in this case, it happened to be our own story and the stories of our families and the interests of our community. And once we did that, then all of a sudden it felt like, and all of a sudden it started to be a little bit more interesting. And people stopped thinking about personal finance, as you said, as something that's for those people and it's actually for all people. Now that I can relate to it, now that you've helped them or we've led them think about all of the different ways that this information was important to them, and as a result, how they should be thinking about it. Those are really sort of the underlying motivations for why we decided to book. It was a 3-year process, a very, very long process. But again, something that we both individually and together always wanted to do. And so when the opportunity presented itself, we jumped on it.
Yeah, books are a process, guys. Some people can churn them out really fast. I don't get it, but usually they take quite a while. Yeah. We met at the Plutus Awards, which is this awards that I guess are given to personal finance content creators who are doing really cool things in the space to help others learn about money. And you guys won an award for your mini series, the Money on the Table one. And I've watched that as well. I think that's what makes this such a great conversation, is that you are very, very open with your own finances, your own story, and bringing your own family in as well. And that's what makes you guys the perfect speakers for this. Can you tell us a little bit about the series? And then I want to start asking you some more in-depth personal questions.
Yeah, so we really just decided to think about all of the different and cool ways that we can continue to make personal finance and the topic and family finance relevant to people who, again, felt very comfortable ignoring the subject. And so we said, wow, if I were to schedule a webinar like this and say, hey, I think we should jump on this call and really start talking about different ways to manage our money as a family. We'd get, let's say, this kind of response. But the moment you start to make it look like travel television, and then on top of that, you make it look like food television, which is something that people have on in the background, especially these days, all the time. So we started thinking about the possibilities, like, wow, how might we be able to approach people learning in a way that was also entertaining, but just much more intimate than just a more formal lecture style, right? It's not to take anything away from one way of doing it, but it's about recognizing that people have preferences that shape the way that they want to learn. And I think one of the ways that we think most people learn today, whether we recognize it or not, is through entertainment. We're learning all the time. And so the question became really, how do we make it fun? How do we make it not feel like education? How do we get people thinking? How do we get people confronting some of the things that they're struggling with and make it look and feel fun? And also, by the way, how do we make it sustainable for us so that it's fun? Because if it's not fun for us, we're not going to enjoy doing it. And we think that that's going to reflect in the end product. And so that's something that we did in the very early days of the pandemic, which was, I want to say 2020. We've done 2 seasons now. We hit the road. We traveled to, I think it was 6 different cities in season 2. And we'll see what happens with season 3. I don't know. It's a lot of work. But we do know that it works in terms of leading people or attracting people to a set of topics and conversations that they otherwise felt very comfortable ignoring.
And for those of you who are watching, I mean, we have a high school audience here. If you are thinking about starting a business or a YouTube channel, an Instagram influencer profile, like this is what you have to think about. How can I serve people? And how can I do this in a way that's going to be sustainable for me? Like I have to be really into what I'm doing. I can't do it just because I think someone else is going to buy or listen or watch. Like I have to be very into what I'm doing, very passionate about it if you're going to sustain it and keep it going.
Sure.
So yeah, great advice there for all you entrepreneurs out there. So now we want to talk about family and finance, and I want to go to the beginning. And this is, I guess, when you two first met as a couple. What did that look like? What age were you guys when you met, and what was that initial dating process like, and how did money come into it?
So I was in my late 20s when we met, and Julien was in his early 30s. He's a little older than me, and we actually met at work. And we dated and got into our relationship really quick. Not that I recommend this for those of you that are listening, but we ended up having a very early conversation about money, which actually was an argument about money. We had a disagreement about how credit card debt should be handled after we took this trip together. And Julien said if he had known that I had struggled with credit card debt, then he would have never dated me to begin with. So yes, we had a rocky start.
Very proud moment.
We had a rocky start, but let our marriage today be a sign that you can overcome financial conflict in your relationships if both people are on the same page. But we started dating. We were very fortunate to have that conflict very early in our relationship because it allowed us to talk about money very early in our relationship. And some of the lessons and the findings that we uncovered in that process of trying to get back together are the things that we built our marriage on and what has kind of guided us to this point.
Yeah. And the only thing that I will add is one, that's not a very proud moment for me, but to Kiersten's point, I'm really glad that I said what I said, because it actually helped me to realize, wow, where is that really strong point of view coming from? And it forced me to confront some of the challenges and issues of my past that had shaped these really strong and awkward beliefs about money, to the extent that I was willing to let go of something that obviously meant a lot to me. And it also, I think, forced her to think about, like, wow, how did I get to a point where I felt so loose and free, as if money just sort of grew on trees, right? And so it was a really unfortunate and kind of ugly period in our life, but we were able to overcome it. And it's really what led us to start thinking, like, wow, why aren't more people talking about this?
Right.
That was like a repeated theme in our relationship. And as we started to look outwards into our family and into our community.
Yeah, there's a couple of parts there. I mean, most people don't talk about this stuff. And when it does come up, it can come up in arguments or ugly ways because we keep it suppressed. We get to this boiling point and it erupts and it comes out, and then we kind of get an insight as to what people are truly thinking or feeling. So there is a whole lesson here on how to have a conversation like this with a spouse or a partner in the future. But before that, I want to go what you said. You said about the influences that had shaped your mindset up to that point. Where did those come from? Was it family? Was it peers? Was it where you grew up? What do you think shaped your mindsets about money? Because it seems like you had two very different mindsets before you met.
It was all of the above. I think we were a
Mhm.
classic combination of people who grew up on the other side of the tracks. In my case, I grew up in 1980s Brooklyn, New York City. It was a very tough period for the city. I grew up in an immigrant household, and so there's an entire dynamic of immigrating to the country with a couple dollars in your pocket. If in my mom's case, it was less than that. It was almost nothing. But here, hoping to sort of build a life for herself. We grew up surrounded by drugs and poverty and violence. And these things were just flat out normal to me. And so when we finally left New York and came to Atlanta, it was the very first time that I started to understand like how big the world was, because to an extent, all I knew was what I saw in Brooklyn, New York. And so when I started to think about in young adulthood, how I viewed what was possible for people like me, what was possible for really anyone. Like it was a very, very limited perspective. And so for the first 20, maybe 25 years of my life was pretty much defined by poverty and struggle. And so even into young adulthood, when I had money and I'd worked my way up through the corporate ladder, it took a very, very long time for me to even acknowledge how all of those things shaped the way that I would view money and the role that it played in building a life together with somebody else.
Mhm. And I was pretty much the opposite. I grew up in a two-parent household here in Atlanta. And during the time where I was growing up, Atlanta was basically experiencing economic renaissance for
Yeah.
Black families. We had Black leadership in government. We hosted the Olympics. We had sports teams. We had everything. And so my view of how quickly progress can happen, what's possible in terms of economic growth and opportunity was shaped by that. And I had taken it to the extreme. I had not factored in all of the work that went into it before I came to being, but I just assumed that things, once they went up, would always go up. And that kind of blind optimism affected my financial choices.
Okay, so two very different upbringings and how they shape our attitudes, beliefs, and values around money. And I encourage all of you watching to just think about it for a second. Like, how has my upbringing shaped my views about money? What have my experiences been? What have the attitudes of my family been? Are they savers? Are they spenders? What is money used for? Those are great questions to ask yourself and try and verbalize. Sometimes it's hard to put those things into words. And if you can, you'll start to understand your own attitudes, beliefs, and values around money much more. And then only then can you actually really start engaging with someone else once you understand yourself.
For sure.
Exactly.
All right, so let's go now back to the relationship, that first argument you guys had. How would you rephrase that argument if you were going to start it now? So if we're realizing that there's some differences in how we're handling money, I want to engage in this process of talking to my partner about money. How would you start it?
Go ahead.
So one of the things I would have started is asking the tough questions up front. So in our case, we waited until after the trip to determine how we were going to pay for it. And that's where the disagreement came in. I was like, credit card. And he was like, no, cash. And so I would practice getting to a habit of asking questions proactively. And so when we decided to take the trip, I would have asked like, what's the budget? How do we plan to pay for it? Should we save up and let that determine when we actually go? And so I think taking a more proactive approach to our finances versus at that time, a very reactive one when things are due would save us a huge amount of trouble.
Yeah, and I would add really kind of reframing the importance actually of conflict. I think so many people, specifically as it relates to relationships, when they think about the idea of having a conflict or an argument with a loved one, they define that as an immediate bad thing. In fact, we take pride in saying like, well, we don't argue about money. And we'd say that as if it's like a point of pride. And the reality is, if you're not arguing about money, and it's not to say that arguing is a good thing, but think about what it represents, right? In many cases, it just represents a confrontation of a different set of values or beliefs. Or it could mean that now we've reached a different point. Our values have changed because times have changed or our environments have changed. We need to reevaluate what those values are. But they're also an opportunity for you to just learn how to communicate effectively with your partner. And so we would really recommend people just reframe the role that conflict plays. It's not this immediate bad thing as much as it can feel that way. It doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, if I continue to have this conversation or this argument or this debate that is ultimately going to lead to ruining this relationship. In fact, it could be the thing that brings you closer together, because now if you're doing it effectively, you have a better way of understanding and communicating with your partner.
Gosh, I love that. So like, we're going to have difference of opinion. We're going to have different values. We're going to have different ways of doing things. And it's not a conflict. It's not a battle. It's not something to be won. It's a conversation to engage in and then try and figure out, well, how are you going to navigate this space together? So you saying like, we don't argue about money anymore probably means that there's no shouting, screaming, yelling, like the things that we associate with, I guess, traditional conflict. But I'm sure there are still differences of opinion on how a situation might be handled. And then you have to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this together?
Sure.
So yeah, all you watching, like it's normal to have differences of opinion. You are not going to find a partner who is the exact clone of you. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And if you do, one of y'all might be unnecessary. Like you kind of want somebody who is going to jump in and challenge you and push you in different ways. And so with that comes natural resistance, natural conflict, and an opportunity for you to learn how to manage those things. Because that's a skill that's going to take you beyond just your romantic relationship.
Sure.
That's going to flow into relationships with your parents. And if you decide to have a child, relationship with your children, like conflict management is a skill that will serve you in many areas of your life.
Yeah. And the absence of avoidance in some cases might actually, the absence of conflict in some cases may actually be an indicator of avoidance and not necessarily success. And so it's certainly something to think about.
So yeah, even if you're saying like, oh, everything's great, like we don't fight, like there's nothing going on here. Inviting these conversations even before they turn into conflicts is something that you can also do, just to say like, hey, we should be talking about these things. It may not be a simmering problem for us right now, but why not have these conversations and start learning more about each other? So when you guys first started dating, what did this look like? Like, I know one of the most common questions I get from my classes is like, we go on a date, who pays? How do we decide on where to go? What happens if one person's making money, the other person is not? So yeah, what do you guys have thoughts there? Like when you start dating and getting into a relationship, when do you introduce money? I mean, it can't be the first date. That can't be one of your first questions, I'm guessing.
It can be.
We know people who have rules for the very first date.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a perfect answer to that. I think our goal is really just making sure that people aren't avoiding the conversation. So whether it's the second date or the third date, just make sure that if you're serious with someone, you're recognizing that money will at some point play a role in your ability to nurture that relationship. And so you have to have that conversation. And whether you're the type of person that wants to carry on a more traditional point of view, where one person pays for everything and the other person sort of enjoys that benefit, or you want to take more of a partnership, or you figure out the extent to which that partnership is, so long as the needs are being met, that's completely up to you. I don't really believe in blanket rules of thumb other than have the conversation so that you're not making assumptions about how the other person prefers to handle those issues. And unfortunately, that's what the vast majority of us do. We just kind of ignore it. We kind of play along. We don't want to allow money to ruin the romantic part of building a life with someone. But unfortunately, that's just kind of like taking a slower approach to sort of the stick of dynamite blowing up. And it comes as that relationship grows, as you start to make bigger decisions like buying a home, having a child, caring for loved ones, or any other number of things that are sort of a natural part of building a life with somebody else. So you want to get into a good rhythm and understanding with your partner. And so I would say the earlier, the better. Whatever that means to you is entirely up to you.
Yeah, and one thing I find with students in particular is that if your partner doesn't know how you feel about money or about your situation, your financial situation in general, how can they know what to expect or how you're going to react to certain situations? So if you're in a situation where like, hey, I'm not working right now, I don't have any income, I can't go spend money on all these things like you can because you are making money. You want to bring that up early and not probably like right as you're going out to dinner or going on a fun trip and being like, well, actually, I'm broke. I got no money. Can you pay for it?
Don't do that when the check comes. That's a bad time.
Like pass it back over the table. No, not the right time. You want to do this early, and maybe not first date, but there is pressure, obviously, when you're dating to, I guess, what's the word? To be the person that you think your partner wants you to be exciting for them. Yeah. to flex a little bit. Yeah, that's probably it. And it's
But I will say this. I will say this at the risk of making a few people uncomfortable. If you're comfortable having a conversation about sex with your partner, whenever that time is, you should feel just as comfortable having a conversation about money with that partner, right? Because both of them have the potential to lead to sort of life-changing outcomes.
Yeah.
And so you really want to make sure that, like, if you're comfortable doing that, right? Like, let's just sort of confront that acknowledgement that we continue to just look at this topic as if it's taboo, or that it's just something that we can all agree that we have an understanding about it. And the reality is there's very little data to suggest that that is the case. And so we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so think about all the things that you're uncomfortable having conversations with your partner about. And sex is obviously one of them. If you're comfortable having that conversation, then you should, for sure, be comfortable having a financial conversation with your partner.
Yeah. And, sex, drugs, money, family, like these are all conversations that sometimes are just a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, especially when you're dating somebody new. So this comes with time and as your comfort level builds. So let's say your relationship, the comfort level is building, you're spending a lot more time with each other. Maybe you're thinking about marriage. What have your finances developed into during this time? Because you came into obviously as two separate people. How have your finances become more united in terms of trying to achieve your goals? Like what did you guys do?
Yeah, so we started with a debt payoff journey. We both paid off our individual debt before we got engaged and married. And then we spent the first year of our marriage paying off our mortgage. And so we got a very unique feeling that not many people in the United States get to feel, which is what it's like to live totally debt-free, to not have a mortgage, to not have credit card debt. And we did that for a while. And then we decided to have a kid, and having a child, raising a child is a very expensive endeavor that requires you to make some budgeting trade-offs. And so with that, we started another journey that led to leaving our corporate jobs. And so we've always been very united in our financial planning. We talk about it on a regular basis. We talk about a quarterly plan. We talk about an annual plan. And then at some point we go into a long-term, like 3 to 5 year plan, where we're really just creating a vision for the kind of days and the kind of life that we want to live. But we have been very kind of locked and in sync since the day that we thought about even getting engaged.
So when you were doing your debt payoff of your individual debt, were you both working towards your own debts, or did you support each other in paying off each other's debts? Like, were you kind of intermingling your finances before you got married?
We didn't start intermingling our finances until we got engaged. But up until that point, so the first 3 years or so, we were paying things separately. Now, we were each other's like accountability buddies. We made sure to adjust date night expectations because we knew that we had these goals in mind. But it was very much like, I'm paying mine, you're paying yours. And then once we got engaged and I moved in with him, we started combining the finances more kind of closely.
And I think that's an important point, because to an extent you can say that it was intermingled, right? Like, we decided that we were going to be very deliberate about what we were going to do, or to the extent in which we were going to devote parts of our individual and separated money towards these experiences. And so we still had tons of fun together, but we were also very mindful that, all right, there's a limit to how much we want to do, because we are agreeing that there is a 3-year goal, there's a 5-year ambition that we want to accomplish. And so while we hadn't formally blended things, there was certainly an understanding that I'm doing my part, you're doing your part, so that we can sort of come together and be on the same page from the very early stages of marriage.
And that, again, another amazing point for all of you watching is that you need to have goals. You need to think about where you are right now, where you want to be. So even those of you sitting in a high school classroom right now, like, have you thought about this? What do I want life to look like in 1, 3, 5 years from now? Do I see myself going to college? Do I see myself starting a job straight away or joining the military? Once I do that, once that's over, what's life going to look like then? What do I want my 30s to look like? What kind of home do I want to live in? Car I want to drive? Place, like, do I want to travel? Do I want to live in one spot? And just thinking about those things now allows you to put those wheels in motion in terms of what you save, how you spend your money, how you budget. And then once a partner comes into play, well, now you get to plan together. That's the really fun part. And you potentially have 2 incomes, or at least 2 people working towards the same goals. You have that accountability partner, and you get to really kind of supercharge your way towards it.
Sure.
Yeah. And you don't have to treat it like gospel. Like whatever you decide now, you can change your mind later. But I think what thinking about it does is it allows you to try to find role models and mentors and people that are already actively living that life. So you can ask the questions that you need to ask. Like when you were my age, what kind of internships did you look at? What kind of extracurriculars were you doing? How did you think about college? And that way you just have more inputs, more data, more information about the kind of life that you think you want for yourself.
And you have a great segue into that conversation right here. You can say, hey, I was listening to this presentation in class today. They were talking about different aspects of finances and goal planning. I would love to know what you guys do. And that's a great way to open up a conversation with your parents, particularly if money is not something you normally talk about at home, or grandparents or aunts, uncles, friends of your family, whoever it is. It's a great entry point. Whatever you're talking about in class, use that. Okay. On the student reflection sheets that students may or may not have in front of them, one of the questions is, how did having a child change the finances of your family? So like, what are 3 specific things that you like had to change about how you budget or how you spent money once little baby Saunders came into the picture?
Yeah, there was quite a bit. Like I said, we were debt-free, mortgage-free. We had a really tight home. It wasn't tiny, but it was small. And one of the biggest changes that we made was to housing. We ended up moving to a different neighborhood that was more family friendly and had the schools that we were looking to send our son to. And so that was a big change in our life. Food obviously was a big change. Now that you have a little one who can't necessarily eat solids at first, they may need formula, or they may need, other types of breast milk or whatever types of feeding that you're on. All of it has a cost. I know there is a general thought that breastfeeding is free, but it is not. Ask anyone who does it. So that was the next cost, was in food, just making sure that we could prepare for a third mouth to feed. And then the third one, and the really important one, is childcare. So in the US, for the first 5 or 6, depending on when your child is born, 5 or 6 years, childcare is for you to handle. You're on your own. There's no national program that you can just put your child in, like the public school system. And a lot of that, most of the time, is out of pocket. And so figuring out how to pay for 5 years or 6 years of childcare while you work and continue to do all of the other responsibilities that you had before they got here is a huge financial decision. And so those were probably the 3 biggest areas that affected our budget after he was born.
And then there's just all of those, like the miscellaneous baby costs in my budget that just seems to fill up every single month.
Diapers.
Yes.
Like little kids use the bathroom a lot in those early days. You're going through like 10 to 20 diapers a day, and they're very pricey.
There are 2 things that I am like just obsessing over right now, and they may sound tiny. One of them is just like snacks. Right? Our son doesn't go to after school anymore, and we literally made that decision. It was like, all right, well, you can send him to after school for just a couple more hours so that we have more time at home to do all of the other things that we want to do, or we can bring him home. We decided to ultimately bring him home, which means the snack budget went through the roof because all of a sudden there were just more hours in the day, and he's just munching and munching on things. But even little things like him starting activities now, just started playing baseball, which means he's going to need a bat, going to need a helmet, he's going to need a glove. If he wants to practice, we're going to need to have some of the things that we do on our own. And so it's all of the little things that just build up over time. And again, considering how fragile most people's household budgets are, those little things can either mean that you're going to do these activities or you're not. You're going to go to these programs. And in many cases, we talked about development of your children or not. And so those are really difficult decisions that a lot of families are having. We're not immune to those. And so it's something that I think people really should start thinking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure for parents to spend money. Like you will see advertising targeted at you constantly about spending money in different ways to be a good parent or responsible parent or caring parent, loving parent, whatever it is. And you have to decide how you're going to do this journey with your partner, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then make your plan and try and stick to it as best you can. Try not to get pulled off of it by all these different pressures, whether it's family, advertising, friends, social media. Like there's a lot of things that will try and influence how you spend your money when it comes to kids.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought up all of those things. There's a lot. It's not cheap. It doesn't have to be the most expensive thing in the world either, but it's not cheap. So please make sure you are thinking about that before you introduce kids into your life if possible.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so now moving into the next stage, which would be you're married, you've got kids who are getting older, and eventually they're going to leave the home, which is the hope, at least. I think that's what all of us parents want, right? Is that our kids will be financially independent enough to go when they want, and they'll come back and visit, hopefully. But how does a lot of our teens watching mine in particular are seniors, so they are just about to venture out into the world on their own, some becoming totally financially independent or maybe are already. But what are some things that we need to think about as we make that transition from being dependent on our parents to independent of our parents, at least financially?
Yeah, so I think one of the trends that I'm asking everybody to think about is around, sorry, there's someone blowing leaves outside of our door. So if you hear that, my apologies, but is around the trend of caregiving. So as of today, 1 in 6 Americans, so 53-ish million Americans, I get closer to the mic, have to care for a loved one, either that is sick or disabled. And while you may think that that is just people in their 30s and 40s, there's actually been new findings that suggest that about 3 million of those are people that are in Gen Z. They're young. Some of them are under the age of 18 and some of them are under the age of 22. It's happening sooner and sooner. And this is a huge trend for the country because it takes away from your ability to earn in traditional ways. It takes away from your ability to just get a traditional 9 to 5 and dedicate your life to it. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging all families to do is to come up with a care plan. Don't just assume that you're going to live until you're 80 to 90 before you need someone to actively care for you. There, with the global pandemic and a number of health issues that are stemming up from that, there are a lot of people who need care earlier in life. There was a Wall Street Journal article the other day that said parents are moving in with their kids younger than ever. So it's actually a reverse trend of us leaving their houses. Now they're coming back to our houses. And so this idea of multi-generational family living, caregiving, it's something that everybody should have top of mind and make sure that you, one, are taking care of yourself, prioritize your mental and physical health and well-being, and then have those uncomfortable conversations with your parents and loved ones about their physical health and well-being as well.
Yeah, it's not an easy conversation. Like, what are we going to do when you can't take care of yourself anymore? Or what have you done to prepare for retirement? And sometimes I feel like people are afraid that that's going to come off as, how much am I going to get when you die? And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like, well, how are you going to continue your quality of life throughout your older stages where maybe your physical body is not as able as it was? Are you going to have the financial means to take care of yourself or to meet all of your needs? Or are you going to need help? Are you going to need somewhere to live? What happens when you need physical needs met? Do you have like a nursing home plan or a long-term care plan? And just, again, this is a great time to do it because you've now had a conversation in class where we've talked about this. And you can just go home and say, look, we were talking about this long-term care stuff and retirement. I'd love to know, how are you guys planning for retirement? What are you doing? Because I want to start thinking about it for myself. And make it about you. Like, you're planning to do this for yourself, and you might get some nuggets of information about what your parents are thinking about right now. But like, say we're on the other side. So we're the younger person looking to leave, and it is getting older and older, by the way, everyone. Like, I think the average age that people are leaving home and becoming financially independent is like 28, maybe. Like, we're seeing late 20s still living at home because it's just so expensive to exist in this world right now. Inflation is super high. The cost of rent or buying a property is very high. Food is expensive. Transport is expensive. So what we're seeing is a trend of young 20-something-year-olds starting their careers, paying off their student loan debt, saving up for a down payment at home, and living at home during that time to reduce costs. But once we're ready to get out, what are the kind of the nuts and bolts things that we probably need to put in place or have, like a bank account, or I guess we need somewhere to live. We need a plan for food. Like, what are the things that you think we need to think about before we step off on our own?
Yeah, and that's a really long list, right? If we're just being honest, right? There's no one thing that we can say. Obviously, a strong understanding of the fundamentals of personal finance are going to help you. But it includes everything from ensuring that you have a checking account so that you have a place where your income can live so that you can pay for your bills. You want to make sure you have a savings account so that you're not spending every single dollar that you earn. You may even want to start investing at a very early age, which is something that we highly recommend everyone do. Again, when we talk about some of the challenges that we know the older generation, our parents' generation are dealing with, it in many cases has to do with the fact that they've underprepared, they've not saved enough. And in some cases, that's because they haven't earned enough, or they didn't start early enough, or some combination of both. And so we owe it to ourselves to have those uncomfortable conversations, to learn from them, to make sure that we're using the tools and putting the systems in place to ensure that we are not repeating the mistakes and the downsides of the past. And so it's all of the above. It's also making sure that you have a strong understanding of credit, because debt can have a really negative impact on your financial life at any stage. And so you want to make sure that the things that you're doing are ensuring that you have a good credit score, that you're paying your bills on time, that you're honoring your debt obligations, whether it's a mortgage or a car loan or a student loan debt, all of those things. It can impact your ability to invest. In some cases, it can even impact your abilities to get the job that you are qualified for. And so all of the above, I think, are really, really important. And that's why conversations like this, are so important, because we know that unfortunately a lot of people aren't having these conversations at home. So luckily we can have them amongst friends, amongst peers, and then we can take those lessons back to our family.
And all of those things, plus a couple of others, like have this conversation with whoever your guardian is right now. Like, when I do go off on my own, is there things that you are still going to be covering? So like, am I going to be able to stay on your cell phone plan? When do I need to get my own health insurance? These are questions that you do want to figure out, because some people just have no clue. They're like, oh, this has always been paid on my behalf. And then suddenly you're responsible for it. You don't even realize it. I think a huge one for many young people is, do you have a support system at home financially, at least, if things go badly? Mm-hmm. So if you lose that first job, if your first apartment falls through, if we make mistakes, which a lot of us do in the early stages, if we make mistakes, do we have a financial system to fall back on? Like, can your parents help you out if there's an emergency, or are you on your own? And if you're on your own, you got to get that emergency fund started really fast and funded quite quickly and to a large amount, because you don't have that safety net to fall back on.
Absolutely. Yeah. The emergency fund, and you need to be resourceful in terms of community and role models. The benefit of the digital age that we're in and the internet is that you can find people that have had similar situations as you to learn from. Now, some of them may still be in the middle of it. And so it's just a matter of, camaraderie and saying, I understand, but there are a lot of people have come from terrible situations, bad mistakes, number of things that are there, and sharing their lessons and giving guidance. And so your ability to be resourceful, to know how to search for income earning opportunities, to search for advice that is credible and honest, is also going to be a tool that you have in your toolkit.
Okay. And before we get into the Q&A, which is coming up in like a minute, I have one more question I want to ask you. But if you are watching and you have a question for any of us, please put it in the chat, or your teacher can do it, and we will get that answered for you. If you're watching the replay, throw it in the comment section. We will get to it at some point. As a teenager who wants to get more involved in our family finances, do you have any tips or ways that we could do that? So like, how can we encourage the money around the table conversation that you guys are so famous for now? Like, how do we do that?
My first advice would be, just don't underestimate how important it is to listen and to learn how to listen. I think a lot of us jump into these conversations wanting to lead them or solve them. And you may not be at the point where you're able to do that with your family. It depends on what roles people are playing in their family, what your past behavior has indicated that you're able to cope with from your parents or your caretakers. So just practice listening from an empathetic point of view, practice asking questions that establish context. So instead of just jumping into what's your retirement plan and what are you going to do if you get sick, maybe start with, when you were 16, what did you do after school? And how did your dad make money? Or how did your mom handle the bills? Or whatever you want to understand about their life, because their baggage is going to add to the way that they're managing their money now. And so even when we had the conversation with Julian's mom on Money on the Table, one of the early questions that we asked her was about her childhood, where she revealed that she actually grew up without electricity. She spent the first 14 years of her life without electricity. And so if we come in recommending apps and password accounts and all of this, fancy financial stuff, it's like we kind of have to start really small, and it allows you to kind of gain empathy for your parents in the situation that they may be in or not be in, just by asking more contextual questions and learning how to listen without feeling like you need to jump in and solve it.
Yeah. And the only other thing I would add is really going back to the fundamentals of investing and keeping it simple and automating it, right? And so all of those things can seem very complicated. I know there's a lot of information out there on the internet, but I want you to think about investing the same way you think about having Wi-Fi access. If the Wi-Fi goes down next month, I guarantee you we're all trying to figure out a way to get that thing back up, and we just build that into the budget. I would view investing the exact same way. Like, you don't want to really, like, obviously you can live without it, but you want to be able to just make that be a normal part of your budget. And the sooner you do that, the sooner you accept this sort of normal and natural, and in some cases automated process of putting your money to work for you, your life will be significantly easier as you go through all of the phases, whether it's dating, marriage, going to college, caring for your parents, you name it. Like, the more money that you have at your disposal, that you are in control of, that you can use, the easier your life is going to be. That's just an unfortunate but very real fact about what it means to kind of live in today's times.
Yeah, we had similar conversation with Athena Valentine recently. We were talking about budgeting and that idea of paying yourself first, cutting off a slice of your income and just saying, this is for saving, investing. We never have it. We never spend it. It never hits our bank account, or it's in and out immediately. And you just learn to live with what's left. And you will find this amazing pot of money at the end from the investing, and then this emergency fund that's always there to kind of catch things when they fall. And you don't feel that pressure of like, where is this money going to come from for this emergency? And things don't feel like emergencies anymore.
Yes.
It is a huge stress reliever, guys, when you have this stuff taken care of and you do it from the beginning.
Yes.
All right, let's get into some questions. So first one I have is from Taylor, and Taylor wants to know, when you're getting married, separate or joint bank accounts? What do you think?
It is a very personal decision. We decided to do a joint bank account. Actually, at first we had joint and separate. So we had a joint that paid all of the primary bills, and then we had two separate that we could use for personal expenses. When we moved, we were changing all the paperwork and our son was born, it was easier to just combine it into one. I know people who have successful relationships with separate joint accounts. I know people with singular joint accounts. It really just depends on your comfort level with your partner. There's benefits to both approaches. So
yeah. I think at a minimum, you should be, if you're looking for a hard answer, then it's a hybrid approach at a minimum. Our preference is to do joint, but at a minimum, you have a shared account that you both use in order to fund your shared lifestyle. And then there's a bit of freedom that you both can enjoy, where you can do what you want, the other person can do what they want, and you both go about your merry business, so long as the shared account, which takes care of the life that you're building together, is taken care of. So that, to me, I think is a bare minimum. But our preference, because it's easier to manage, is to do shared accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for myself and my wife, we have that hybrid approach. We have the joint account where all of our bills, our saving, our investing flow through. And then we have, private checking accounts that our income comes into before we send it to the joint account. And there's always a little bit left over. Yeah. For whatever you want to spend it on. It's kind of like this guilt-free, like you don't have to run it by the partner. You can buy gifts with it if you want. Like, it's just your money to spend. And that's, for us, it's nice to have that independent piece. And especially if you want to surprise the other person, like they're not going to be like, hey, what's this transaction?
Exactly.
Just a follow-up question to that. How do you guys manage then your budget? So you're both spending out of the same account. How do you make sure that you're not overspending, or is it not as much of a big deal for you because your incomes are higher now than they were in the beginning?
Yeah, it's it's gotten better over the years. When we were traditionally employed, we would have a meeting literally the day after our checks hit. So our checks would hit on Thursday morning, and by Friday, we already knew where that money was going, and we would send it out immediately to bills, to debt, to investing, all of those things. As we've left the traditional workforce and as we've gotten more comfortable with our spending patterns, we actually talk about money a lot less frequently. We have monthly conversations where we're looking at the accounts and recalibrating and balancing everything. But a lot of the benefit that comes with a longer term relationship is that you can kind of anticipate that the car is going to need new tires, or that, tax bill, you might owe the IRS something, and you can kind of create those pockets in advance. And so we don't have to watch it so closely now.
And have you guys, I mean, my wife and I, we've kind of developed this unwritten rule that if we're going to spend more than $100, that we just run it by the other person first. So that there's like this feeling of, yeah, anything small, like we've got it within our budget. Absolutely. If something has to change, it's more than $100, we run it by each other. Did you guys develop any sort of like unwritten or written rules like that kind of helped you navigate some of those bigger decisions?
I guess so, but I don't know that we think about them as rules, but there's certainly, I wouldn't call it a written or unwritten rule, but there's definitely a shared understanding that large sums of money should not magically disappear from the account without letting the other person know. So we don't. It's not written down anywhere. We haven't discussed it, but we certainly know that And if I had to say, that number is probably somewhere in the ballpark of like $250. Like it's like, all right, let me know before we go crazy.
Yeah, and that'll change as your incomes increase, as your comfort with each other increases, and that trust level builds. So it can start much smaller when you're beginning. Don't worry.
Yeah.
All right. Next question comes from Jared, and I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but his question was, what if your spouse has a shopping addiction, and how would you deal with that? But I want to open that up to your partner has maybe a spending. I don't even if I want to call it a problem, but their outlook is different to you. They're much more of a spender. Less of a saver for tomorrow, more of a spend it for today kind of person. And you feel like it's hurting your family's or your partnership's finances. How would you handle that?
Ooh, yeah, we actually addressed this in our book, Cashing Out, because I was the spender. And we actually recommend that people address it from a point of empathy, because people who save a lot and spend a lot are both just chasing a feeling. At the end of the day, everybody spends money. The difference between a spender and a saver is that spenders want to spend the money today when they get it, and savers want to spend it later after they have a lot of it. And so I think one of the solutions is to really talk about what feeling they're chasing when they're spending that money as soon as it comes in. So is it a fear of missing out? Is it an excitement about a deal? Is it boredom? Is it hunger? Sometimes you might just spend money because you're hungry. So in those cases, I think being empathetic towards your partner instead of accusatory or calling them names can help you reveal just one layer deeper on the emotional spectrum of what's driving this to help you get to a solution. Now, it may take several at-bats. You may have to do this transaction by transaction. You don't want to come off as nagging, but you really want to try to get to like the underlying feeling that's there, and then try to replace that with something besides spending it immediately. And some of that might be shared goals, where it's like, man, if you can chill on the Starbucks for 3 weeks, we can actually go buy that new television or the new patio furniture that we've both been wanting. So sometimes it might just be kind of reframing the reward as something that is actually worth kind of stopping the behavior in the moment. And other times it's something far more emotionally, hard. But at the end of the day, what's driving the behavior is a feeling, and you just got to find what that feeling is.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is this goes back to, really the mission for for Rich and Regular, which is to inspire better conversations about money. And by that, we mean more frequent, more transparent, and not necessarily less instructional, but more conversations that look at the total picture of things that impact the way that people think about money, right? So let's think about, have those uncomfortable conversations, ask them, where is this coming from? And obviously, if it's creating conflict in your relationship or in your family, you want to get to the root of those things. And you want to give that person time to defend their point of view, because they might actually have a justifiable reason for why they think and act the way that they do. But you don't want to barge in the way that I did about 10 years ago with a strong accusation, because that could ultimately lead to ruining that relationship. And so if you truly love that person, you're in a relationship with them, or you see a future with them, I think you owe it to give them a chance to defend their experience. But running in with labels and accusations and shame is probably not going to be an effective way to handling the situation.
And this sounds really good, guys. And I will tell you right now, this is a practice. You will try this. You will try and come in soft. You will try and come in with this seek to understand first, and you will totally fail at it, because this is very much an art, a skill that you will develop over time.
Yes.
So give yourself some grace if your first couple of tries of this don't work out very well.
Yeah.
But I love that. Seek first to understand, and then to try, and if there is a problem to be fixed, to fix it. And sometimes you realize, like, my partner is spending money in this area because it's something that they didn't have when they were a child, and this is what makes them feel important or in control, or that what brings joy to their life. Like for my wife and I, like, we will never cut coffee dates out. Like Starbucks will be one of the first things on the budget, because it's what brings a lot of joy to our lives, going out together and getting coffee together. So if you can keep those things in there and then get rid of maybe the other stuff that isn't as important, you'll find budgeting much easier. But yeah, seek first to understand. That's great advice. Okay, what is your number one piece of advice for teens to build wealth in the future? And you can do a joint one, or you can do separate.
She'll go ahead.
So
she's better at the pointers than I am.
Mine would be to give your income a purpose. You may be thinking that none of this applies until you are much older and have a salaried position. But I would imagine that some of you listening today earn an income, whether it's through babysitting, walking your neighborhood dogs, whether it's through a part-time job. You might be earning an income now. And the important thing is that any dollar that you earn, you need to give a purpose. When your income doesn't have a purpose, you become vulnerable to things like consumerism and peer pressure and a number of other factors, very strong factors that can take away from the goals of creating a very solid and foundational life for yourself. So make sure that whenever you get a dollar, you decide that some of it can go to the fun stuff. Some of it can absolutely go to, like, the things that you enjoy doing. But a lot of it, a majority of it, a good portion of it can go to preparing you for a life later on.
I agree with her.
What she said, yes.
I should have. What she said. Yeah, I won't pile on to it. And I think she's absolutely right, because so many of us really, if you ask people, that they want to make a bunch of money, but they don't really know what they would do. There's not really a plan in place to sort of allocate that money when that actual dreams comes true. And I think that's where that framework comes in really handy. It ensures that there's a plan in place so that when it comes in, you don't just spend it and then you're stuck in this constant cycle of always having to earn more. So you want to be really clear about where your money is going to go even before you earn it.
Yes.
And the great thing is that that's not advice just for building wealth in the future. That's great advice for having a great life today as well. Like you, as Kiersten said, like, you're going to enjoy today. You're going to make sure there's money allocated for that fun stuff that you really love doing, that you really want to do. But then you've also got the stuff allocated for future you and whatever those goals are. And this doesn't have to be like future you when you're 60 years old. Like, this can be future you in 5 years, 10 years, 15, whatever life you want to have for yourself. Like, make that happen. That's wonderful advice and a great place to end on.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any final thoughts you guys have? And also tell us where people can find you if they want to reach out to you and ask you more questions.
You can find us at richandregular.com. We are also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Rich and Regular. We do not have an active TikTok. I do have like a secret account, but I haven't posted anything. So stick to IG, Twitter, Facebook, and our website, richandregular.com.
All right. Thank you both so much for being here today. We appreciate your time and for sharing all of your insights and personal details as well. Like, this is something that we need to see more of, is people being willing to share what they've done, what they've experienced, so that money becomes this less taboo thing to talk about.
Yes.
And I will add, please check out their Money on the Table series on YouTube. So your YouTube channel is a wealth of information. Is it Rich and Regular on YouTube as well?
Yes, I forgot about that one. Yes. Rich and Regular on YouTube.
All right. Thank you so much for being here today. And make sure you check out future guest speakers coming up. I think we have one coming up next Tuesday as well. Taylor Kovar from the Money Couple is going to be joining us.
Nice.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you both so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you.